Israel resumed. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Israel will not negotiate while it is under attack. But the Palestinians are now saying that if the Israelis do not come back to the negotiations on Sunday, they will leave. Essentially, the negotiations would collapse. Now, tomorrow, Sunday morning, the Israelis will have a cabinet meeting, their weekly cabinet meeting. After that, it will be clear whether or not they're going to return to these negotiations. If they do not, then the most likely scenario in the coming days and weeks could be a continuation of this slightly lower intensity warfare that we've been seeing over the last few days, of rocket strikes from Gaza into Israel and airstrikes from Israel jets into Gaza. Lower casualty figures than we've seen in the last month, but still casualties nonetheless, still violence continuing.
Joining us from Washington, D.C. once again is Abdullah Al-Arian, Assistant Professor of History at Georgetown University. So do you think both parties will return to the negotiating table soon, or will we see the cycle of violence continuing indefinitely?
Well, the negotiations, I think, are really contingent on one very important crucial element here, and that's the lifting of the siege. I mean, the Palestinians have made their demands quite clear in terms of the things that they've been requesting. They want a complete lifting of the blockade, opening of the land, sea, and air space for them to be able to actually live freely within their own territories in Gaza, to have access to the kind of medical attention and care that they need, especially for the civilian population that's been reeling from the devastating losses during the past month, and even more in the long term in terms of the kinds of effects, the humanitarian toll that the siege has taken. From their standpoint, there's really not much the Palestinians themselves have by way of negotiations in terms of offering anything. They've conceded essentially on all of the major elements.
Yeah.
And they've continued to actually even compromise on the kinds of things that they're even requesting. So, for instance, things like releasing the prisoners, or even things like extending the shore from which they can actually make use of the sea for fishing and things along those lines as well.
Yeah, Nicholas Pelham, the correspondent for The Economist, says that Hamas could be offering Israel the best interim agreement thus far. Unlike its previous terms for a truce, Hamas is not demanding an Israeli withdrawal from East Jerusalem or any other settlement. It's not pinning an armistice on the return of any prisoners. It's simply asking for normal relations, isn't it? An opportunity to trade and a move across ceasefire lines.
Absolutely. This is really just a truce that's based on lifting the humanitarian and devastating blockade on Gaza and being able to actually resume life as normal, or as close to normal, given the fact that this territory is still considered under international law to be occupied territory. And so Israel still continues to maintain its control over the borders, its control over the airspace, and of course the waterways as well. And so this, I think, goes to show that the Palestinians, having repeatedly compromised throughout their recent history, have yet once again decided to compromise and simply look to a humanitarian solution for the current crisis, and not even focus necessarily on the broader political settlement that is still part of a much more long-term process here.
So the ball is in the Israelis' court, isn't it? What's it going to take for them to change their perspective? Is there anyone who could, say, persuade them to do so?
Well, I think that the role of the United States in particular here is very instrumental, and we've seen that the U.S. has actually only shielded Israel from any kind of international condemnation. They voted against the idea of having even a basic investigation into war crimes violations that have occurred based on all of the different reports we've seen, based on all of the different accounts from the human rights organizations, that the U.S. has continued to even send in aid to Israel, have continued to the arms shipments, even in the wake of all of these civilian casualties that we've seen. And I think that this, of course, goes to show that the U.S. is not serious about playing the role of an honest broker here. We've seen this historically, and we're seeing it play out once again. And then, of course, not to forget the role that Egypt is playing under this new military dictatorship of Sisi, in which they are also attempting to pressure Palestinians into simply completely capitulating to Israel's occupation of Gaza and to the blockade. And they're hoping to weaken the Palestinian national movement, which of course now is more united than it's been in many years, and is more or less united in its voice in terms of demanding simply an end to this blockade.
Okay, thanks once again, Abdullah Al-Arian, Assistant Professor of History at Georgetown University. Now, apart from the threat of Israeli airstrikes, people in Gaza are worried about another danger: unexploded missiles and shells. Charles Stratford spent a day with a bomb squad, risking their lives to try and make the streets there safe.
The Israeli military has hit the Gaza Strip hard. Homes, businesses, vital infrastructure flattened, lives destroyed. And the killing could continue after this conflict ends. Unexploded bombs, missiles, tank and artillery shells litter vast areas of Gaza. Hazem Abu Murad walks over an unexploded Israeli one-ton bomb. He heads Gaza's bomb disposal team.
We received calls from civilians saying there is a suspected unexploded device. This is just a small amount of what is still hidden out there.
Hazem shows us an unexploded artillery shell. He says this 139-kilo missile was fired from an F-16 jet. We're finding a lot of these, he says. There were 65 members in Hazem's team when the conflict began. Now there are 60. 3 have been killed and 2 seriously injured doing their job.
Of course my job is very dangerous, but I'm doing my duty for my people. We estimate around 18 to 20,000 tons of explosives has been used in Gaza, coming from artillery, tanks, naval bombardments and airstrikes.
Hazem and his colleagues have no protective clothing. The last time he and his team had any training was by a group of international ordnance experts more than 7 years ago. We head to the power station. Workers there called Hazem, saying they have found at least 1 unexploded tank shell. This tank shell is one of 2 that was found in the power station that was hit here last week in Israeli airstrikes and tank shelling. Now Hazem here says that there is over 1,000 tons of ordnance, unexploded bombs that they have collected so far from this conflict alone. Hazem inspects the 2 shells. Workers removed them from the rubble and left them by the side of the road. This one is not dangerous, he says. The other one is live and could explode at any time if not handled with extreme care. Charles Stratford, Al Jazeera, Gaza.